In the 6th year of my marriage to the humble scholar who had risen to the top of the civil service exams, he finally became the Grand Chancellor. Everyone said he lacked the aloofness of a scholar, that he was a steadfast and cunning official. That was why he had climbed so high, so fast. I had married him despite knowing he had another woman in his heart. I had walked this path with him, enduring the scorn of my fellow nobles, and basking in the adoration of his subordinates' families. And in the end, this husband of mine with his mixed reputation, a man everyone acknowledged was obsessed with power, was willing to risk his career and his entire family's lives to elope with a princess who refused to marry. I asked him, "Even if it means I will die too?" He replied, "Even if it means you will die too." 6 years of marriage severed in a single day. After our separation, I traveled far away and did not see him again for many years. In the vast northwestern desert, post stations were scarce. I had been cut off from the capital for 3 years. Only my father would send someone periodically to ensure my safety. No one else knew of my whereabouts. By the time I returned to the capital, the events of the past had long since settled. Princess Serafina, who had eloped, had eventually submitted to the emperor's will and married into the Shia family, becoming a matriarch. And Lord Valerius. He was still the Grand Chancellor, as if nothing had happened. As soon as I entered the city, the rumors began to fly. I wonder if Princess Aurelia regrets it now, abandoning the Grand Chancellor in his darkest hour. The Valerius family is still as powerful as ever, while the princess has wasted her youth. Where will she ever find such a good husband again? Women's insights are always so shallow, I say. The Prince of Qin should have had more children. This only daughter of his has been spoiled beyond reason. You are wrong about that. The Prince of Qin is a great hero of our dynasty. It is a good thing our times are more open-minded. Otherwise, for speaking so freely of the royal family, you'd have lost your head several times over. My maid rose, pulled the carriage curtain shut, her voice filled with indignation. What do they know? It was clearly he who abandoned you, my lady. How dare they twist the story? I patted the back of her hand to comfort her, then said calmly, "The royal family scandals are not for public consumption. The emperor would never allow it." To outsiders, it seemed as if Lord Valerius had only been out of favor for a short time. Confined to his residence for 3 months, unable to attend court or see the emperor. And I was the short-sighted one, so afraid of the Valerius family's fall from grace that I had made my move early. I even smiled. If outsiders knew that we hadn't just separated, but that I had been the one to divorce him, the gossipmongers would have drowned my father's entire estate in their saliva. We returned to the prince's residence. My father was waiting at the main gate. The moment he saw me, his eyes reddened. The man who had once been a formidable general on the battlefield became as gentle as water in front of my mother and me. "Your mother didn't know you were arriving today. She went to a temple outside the city to pray for your safety." Tears welled in my eyes. I let my father's rough hand pat my head, then playfully entered the gate with him. I had been away for 3 years. At first, I was lost in a haze of confusion and pain, unable to eat. In just a few months, I had become rail thin. Later, I gradually calmed down and began to enjoy the desert scenery. In that vast and open land, all the tears I had shed in secret were absorbed by the thick, yellow earth. All the unfulfilled desires of my youth faded into the past. Then, one ordinary night after 3 years, I suddenly missed my parents in the capital. So I packed my bags that very night and rushed back. In the Prince of Qin's residence, I was always their precious pearl, not the old spinster who had wasted her youth, as the outsiders called me. When my mother returned and saw me, she burst into tears. I was filled with guilt. It wasn't until late that night, after dinner, that we sat in the courtyard admiring the moon. My father finally spoke in a low voice. "The emperor still doesn't trust me." A long silence followed. Then I forced a cheerful smile. "Tomorrow I'll go to the palace to pay my respects to my imperial uncle. Perhaps when he sees how unimpressive I've become, he'll be a little more at ease." The smile on my father's face was still strained, but he nodded. What threat could a prince who had long since relinquished his military power pose to the emperor? But suspicion is an incurable disease. When the late emperor was still alive, there were 9 princes. The current emperor was the eldest son of the empress, but his literary talents were no match for the brilliant 7th prince, and his military prowess was no match for his own brother, my father, the Prince of Qin. Even among the remaining princes, he was not the most outstanding. Before the late emperor passed away, rumors of a change in the line of succession would surface from time to time. He never addressed them. It was unclear whether he truly intended to change his heir, or if he was just using the rumors to push the current emperor to improve. In any case, the current emperor had spent decades in the shadow of these rumors, sleepless and afraid. After he ascended the throne, my other imperial uncles were either dead or disposed of, leaving only my father, his own brother. He not only suppressed every family that had ever suggested a change in the succession, but he also frequently arranged marriages between noble and commoner families to weaken the ties between the nobles. As for my father, taking away his military power was not enough. He was still constantly on guard. My marriage to Lord Valerius was the result of his probing. Now, all we could do was wait and see. The next day, I went to the palace with my mother. As we walked down the long path outside the main hall, I saw a familiar figure in the distance. I didn't look for long and quickened my pace towards the inner palace. The emperor smiled kindly, first asking if I had gotten used to the Northwest over the years. Then he asked if I had any regrets. I answered each question. Not only had I gotten used to it, but I had no regrets. His expression stiffened slightly. Finally, he asked the question he had been leading up to. Is there anyone you have in mind? I bowed my head, a smile on my lips, and gave him the answer he wanted. Yes, Your Majesty. He couldn't hide his surprise. Which young man has caught our Aurelia's eye? A hint of tenderness entered my voice. His surname is Alaric. He is of humble birth, an orphan, but he is an excellent scholar. Before he could ask, I added, he is Your Majesty's Minister of Justice, Lord Alaric. His tightly furrowed brow finally relaxed. A high-ranking official, but from a humble and simple background, just like Lord Valerius. He nodded in satisfaction. Aurelia has excellent taste. When we left the palace, my mother was worried. Aurelia, why didn't you tell me beforehand? I said softly. Mother, the emperor will have me marry someone eventually. Instead of waiting passively, I would rather choose for myself. The marriage he had arranged for me before had ended just so, hadn't it? He just wanted to keep his brother's most cherished daughter firmly in his grasp. As for the rest, as long as it wasn't too unsightly, what did he care? My mother sighed and didn't ask any more questions. We just set a date for me to invite Lord Alaric to our home for a visit. I agreed. That night, a tall, slender figure snuck into my courtyard. I only had to ask, "Who is it?" And from the catch in the intruder's breath, I knew who it was. My ex-husband, Lord Valerius, who had caused such a scandal with our separation 3 years ago. The familiar scent of bamboo from his clothes filled the night air, slowly and pervasively seeping into every corner of the space. We stood in silence for a long time. Finally, I spoke first. I don't want to make this ugly, Valerius. If you don't leave, I will call for the guards. His breathing quickened, and he moved closer, until he was just an inch away, his warm breath on my skin. He said hoarsely, "You are getting married again." I nodded. Then, thinking he might not be able to see, I added, "Yes, I am." He slowly knelt down in the darkness, looking up at me, his eyes reflecting the moonlight from the window behind me. "You'll consider others, but not me." I was still gentle. Even if every man in the world were to die, leaving only you, I would never have anything to do with you again. His figure wavered. A long time passed. I was growing impatient. He finally said softly, "If it was because of what I said, if I hurt you, then I apologize, Aurelia. But you can't do this to me. First, you leave without a word. I couldn't find you anywhere. And now you say you are marrying another. Aurelia, you can't do this to me." His voice broke on the last sentence. I smiled. I am still more used to you being so formal with me. Just like before, when all his special treatment was reserved for my rival, Princess Serafina. That way, I was only annoyed. Not like now when I felt sick to my stomach. He still didn't move. I couldn't take it anymore and kicked him in the shoulder. Seeing him fall to the ground, I called for the guards. As the voices grew closer and the candlelight brightened, I clearly saw that this man, who had never shown any emotion, had 2 streams of tears running down his face, disappearing into his immaculate collar. Lord Valerius had not always been like this. I had met him before the Emperor arranged our marriage. At the time, I had just had a fight with Princess Serafina and had snuck into the banquet for the new civil service graduates to escape the rain. Through the crowd, I saw the top-ranking scholar, bowing in thanks to the Emperor. He was slender, his face as if carved from jade, clear and gentle. Outside, it was pouring. And from his worn, frayed sleeve, the wet head of a kitten peeked out. He quickly and discreetly pushed it back in, feeding it a piece of a pastry. I was mesmerized and didn't notice Princess Serafina's flushing cheeks as she looked at the second-ranked scholar, the heir of the Shia family. Just 3 days later, at a palace banquet, the Emperor arranged for me and Lord Valerius to be married. He even feigned a choice. Does Aurelia find my top scholar pleasing? The man stood there, silent and detached, as if it had nothing to do with him, as the Emperor arranged his marriage. I only learned later that both his parents were dead, and he had only a young sister. I had already developed a fondness for him at that point. Before I could answer, my father's voice came from the front. Your Majesty, Aurelia is still young. She is my only daughter. Please allow my wife and me to keep her for a few more years. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, the Emperor did not answer immediately, leaving my father kneeling there. A chill went down my spine. I was anxious, but my mother held my hand. After what felt like an eternity, the Emperor finally let out a soft laugh and said, "Then you go back and think it over." In the prince's residence garden, my father said sternly, "I have risked my life for him, yet he only knows how to be suspicious of me. And to top it all off, I have only one daughter, and he wants her to marry a boy who is destined to be a puppet, to be at odds with the noble families, a boy whose life is in constant danger." My mother gently tried to reason with him. Even if you want to defy the decree, you shouldn't be so rash. After today's display, he will likely be up all night, worrying again. But my father was still furious. I listened for a long time before I went to him and knelt down, bowing my head to the ground. "Father, please do not argue with the Emperor over me anymore." Over the years, because I did not get along with Princess Serafina, who had bullied me when I first came to the palace while my parents were away at war, my father had taught me how to fight back. But Serafina was, after all, the Emperor's daughter. My father, unwilling to see me wronged, had been firm with the Emperor many times, which had led to the Emperor's suspicion and constant surveillance of him. Even so, my father was still unwilling for me to suffer any injustice and encouraged me to make a scene whenever I felt like it. But this time, the Emperor was truly angry. I could no longer hide behind my parents and cause them trouble. Besides, Lord Valerius is a very good person. I am willing to marry him. Compared to the hedonistic dandies in the capital, he is in no way inferior. My father sat in silence for a long time, so long that the tea grew cold several times. Finally, he closed his eyes and agreed. And so, the marriage was set. From beginning to end, Lord Valerius did not say whether he was pleased or not. He couldn't afford the betrothal gifts, so the Emperor bestowed them upon him. On my wedding day, Princess Serafina came to my room, ostensibly to add to my dowry, but the triumph on her face was undisguised. She leaned down, looked at my reflection in the mirror, her red lips moving with a hidden meaning. "Aurelia, you must live a good life from now on." I took it as her usual sarcasm, but after the wedding I knew. It wasn't sarcasm, it was a heart-piercing curse. Lord Valerius had someone in his heart. I came to this conclusion in the 3rd month of our marriage. he was a man of strict self-control. Even in our marital bed, we slept under separate blankets. I had thought it was just his nature. Even in our daily interactions, he was always polite and distant. I was only 16 then, and I had been captivated by him at the banquet. I couldn't understand it. In my distress, my mother came to visit. After hearing my words, she said with a hint of bitterness, "Aurelia, in this world there are few couples like your father and me. Most men either have 3 wives and 4 concubines, or they have no interest in women at all. Some are only interested in power, willing to compromise and betray anyone for it. Lord Valerius is a diligent scholar. This means he will not have much energy for matters of the heart. It was my fault for thinking you were still too young and not telling you these cruel truths. But since you have married him as the emperor wishes, your father and I will risk our lives to prevent him from taking any concubines and disturbing your peace. As long as you remain true to yourself, you will not live a bad life." I nodded, uncomprehending. But I couldn't help but think of the brocade pouch he always carried with him. Now that he had a salary, he dressed much more respectably. Only that pouch, old and out of place, still hung at his waist. He never even let anyone else wash it. It looked familiar, but I couldn't remember where I had seen it. I took my mother's words to heart and became more peaceful. Sometimes, when he came home late, I would leave a lamp on for him. Gradually, though he was still formal, he would chat with me about trivial things. Life after marriage had become less difficult. Until one time, while we were playing chess, he still refused to let me win. I was on my period and feeling irritable. I snapped. "Can't you just let me win once?" he replied, as always, in a gentle tone. "My lady, this is a game of chess. There is no letting one win or lose." I stared at him, then suddenly asked, "Do you even know my name?" Under the moonlight, his smooth hair danced in the wind, then fell back into place. The courtyard was silent. A look of embarrassment crossed his face. But I was even more embarrassed. I stood up abruptly and rushed back to my room, my skirt sweeping across the chessboard, scattering the pieces. A long time later, from outside the half-closed window, came a low, "I am sorry." I pulled the covers over my head and cried silently in the stuffy heat. A figure soon pushed the door open and sat on the edge of the bed. The familiar scent slowly filled the room. Just before I suffocated, he gently lifted the covers and looked at my flushed face. "It was my fault. Don't be sad," he said awkwardly. Then he raised his hand and clumsily patted my back. I gritted my teeth. "My name is Aurelia. Remember it." He asked me which characters were used. My anger flared up again. I said petulantly, "That pouch of yours, can I see it?" This time he did not agree, just fell silent. I finally gave up and didn't ask again, but I turned my back to him. At that moment, I knew with absolute clarity. My husband had no feelings for me. After being married for so long, he didn't even know my name, nor did he care. And it seemed he had someone else in his heart. For the next few days, we were in a cold war. He was always busy, and his nature was cool and distant. The only one suffering was me, until the autumn hunt. As a newly promoted official, he was allowed to bring his family. In the dense forest, Princess Serafina and I were competing with each other. We ventured too deep and were suddenly attacked by a pack of wolves. He was the one who led the search party. And when the alpha wolf lunged, he unhesitatingly threw himself in front of Princess Serafina. Even as the wolf tore at his back, he was careful not to make any contact with her. So cherished. Even if anyone had seen, it would not have tarnished her reputation in the slightest. But his voice betrayed his anxiety. "Are you hurt, Your Highness?" I had been about to fight the wolf. But in that instant, my ears were ringing. A wolf seized the opportunity and bit my arm. I snapped out of my daze, killed the wolf with one blow, and then rushed to help him. A long time later, the Imperial Guards arrived and slaughtered the rest of the pack. Lord Valerius, pale, collapsed to the ground. His back was a bloody mess, staining the green grass beneath him. But his hand, which had been supporting him, was the most severely injured. It hung limply at his side. The imperial physician cried out, "It is broken." Only then did Princess Seraphina burst into tears, sobbing her thanks. And I, his wife, stood far away, my face a mask of indifference, until he suddenly remembered something and looked up at me. In my calm gaze, his face turned to ash. Back at the camp, he was praised by the emperor for saving the princess. In a deserted place on the way back, my father slapped the injured man. He did not retaliate, letting my father grab him by the collar and demand to know if he was a husband. I looked away, neither intervening nor watching. I just thought, was he so obsessed with power that he would risk his life for the chance to save the princess, so much so that he couldn't even see the sword beside him? Or was he so in love with Princess Seraphina that he was blinded by his concern for her, with no thought for anything else? Finally, I came to a sad conclusion. Whichever it was, I, his wife, was insignificant in his eyes. Less important than Princess Seraphina, and even less important than power. Inside the carriage, it finally grew quiet. He admitted his fault to my father. My father did not listen, did not look, just sat down opposite me and said dejectedly, "If I had known, I would have let them depose me rather than let you marry such a man." Lord Valerius closed his eyes, his lips trembling. I stopped my father and said playfully, "I want to go back to the prince's residence for a while." He agreed without hesitation. As soon as we entered the city, we went our separate ways. When I returned to the Valerius estate 10 days later, he was already able to walk, but his arm was still in a sling. Seeing me, he scrambled to his feet from the small table where we used to play chess. He came over and, with his good hand, tried to lift my sleeve to see my wound. I sidestepped him, avoiding his touch. My face impassive, I walked past him into the courtyard. Then the servants I had brought from the prince's residence came in, packed my things, and moved them to a courtyard farthest from the main house. He thought I was leaving the estate. Lord Valerius was always a man of few words, but now he was anxious. "My lady Aurelia, please listen to me, I am not." I pretended not to hear and continued to instruct Rose. "Be careful not to bump anything. You go and supervise, then have them come to you for their reward. The Mid-Autumn Festival is approaching, so give each of them an extra 10 taels." Rose nodded and left. I also turned to leave but was held back by Lord Valerius. He was from a humble background. Though he looked slender and handsome, he was well built under his clothes. Now that he had a firm grip on my sleeve, even with my martial arts training, I couldn't break free. So I sat down to make things clear. "You don't need to say anything more. I won't separate from you. We'll just live like this." Remembering how I had once tried to get close to him, I added, "Let's just forget what happened before." The emperor had arranged the marriage. It had only been a year. If we were to separate now, it would be a slap in his face. I had plenty of money. I could live well anywhere. That one glance at the banquet, I would just pretend I had never seen it. My heart still ached, but compared to further humiliation, it was nothing. I never expected Lord Valerius to confess to me. Princess Seraphina is my savior. At the mention of her, I couldn't help but sneer. She has lived in the palace her whole life. Where could she have saved you? Was it at the banquet, where you fell in love at first sight but were forced to marry me? So you came up with this excuse? He shook his head and sat down. She truly is my savior. Seeing his seriousness, I reined in my anger. He recalled the past, a hint of sorrow in his brow. 5 years ago, Lord Valerius was 14. His widowed mother was on her deathbed. The money he earned from copying books and carrying sandbags was not nearly enough to cover the medicine and doctor's fees. In his desperation, he had considered selling himself into servitude, but the thought of his mother being left alone stopped him. He had stopped studying. The books at home had long been sold. The deeds to their house and land were all gone. That night, he knelt by his mother's bed, tears in his eyes, and said, "There is still money. You just focus on getting better." Then he went out, changed into his only set of clothes without patches, and walked towards the red light district. His looks were the only valuable thing he had left. After that night, his path as a scholar would be over. But at the entrance to the alley, a girl on horseback came galloping towards him, her horse's hooves almost trampling him. The girl cried out, reined in her horse, and looked at him for a long moment. Then she pulled a brocade pouch from her waist, threw it at him, and with a haughty expression, rode off without a backward glance. He was in a daze. Even after so many years, he still couldn't remember what she had said. He only knew that she was dressed in fine clothes, adorned with jewels, clearly a noble lady. Inside the pouch was a gold ingot shaped like a rabbit. It not only paid for his mother's treatment, allowing her to die in peace, but also covered the rent, and allowed him to stumble his way through his studies. It wasn't until he became the top scholar that he recognized Princess Serafina at the banquet as the person who had saved his life. His savior was before him. Of course, he had to acknowledge her. Not only acknowledge her, but also repay her kindness. After hearing his story, I vaguely remembered an old incident. But in the current situation, there was no need to bring it up. I understand, I said. Compared to me, a wife who had appeared out of nowhere, a life-saving grace was, of course, far more important. He asked doubtfully, really? I nodded earnestly, really? But the thought that he had never once looked at me when I had been looking at him still made me sad. And I was still going to move out. I would not stand in the way of him repaying his debt, nor would I continue to see him as my true husband. So he shouldn't have continued to provoke me after that. Lord Valerius rose through the ranks quickly. The emperor intended to cultivate his own loyalists, and men like him from humble backgrounds were given important positions. Moreover, he always maintained a certain brotherly affection for my father. After every promotion for Lord Valerius, he would summon my father to the palace for a chat. He felt that although he had arranged a seemingly less than ideal marriage for me, now that Lord Valerius was becoming more and more powerful, he had not wronged me. My father could only accept it. In public, I would be the subject of some gossip, with people saying my husband was only focused on climbing the ladder and lacked the integrity of a scholar. But the families of the newly promoted commoner officials held me in high esteem. Although the emperor was suspicious, my father was very much in favor of this move. He had seen the suffering of the common people and knew how precious the civil service exams were for them. So even though he disliked Lord Valerius, he still gave him guidance whenever he could, to prevent the noble families from becoming too powerful. The only person who troubled me was Lord Valerius. I don't know what got into him, but the man who had once been so formal, he wouldn't even help me with my makeup, now ran to the jewelry shop every time he received his salary. Mamie had seen him there, his face red with embarrassment, just to pick out a suitable hairpin or earring for me. I accepted all the gifts, but always sent him away. Now, we lived in separate courtyards, husband and wife in name only. He didn't get angry. When Rose took the jewelry, he would take the opportunity to glance into the courtyard, and I would pretend not to notice. As time went on, he showed no signs of impatience. Only I grew more and more frustrated. Until one time, when I went to the countryside to visit the orphans I was sponsoring, I caught chickenpox from a new child. When I returned home, I was running a high fever. I told Rose, my voice weak, "Don't alarm the prince and princess." I knew my parents would come to take care of me, but they were in their prime. They had had enough of a life on the edge. They deserved a peaceful retirement. After saying that, I fell into a feverish delirium. In my dreams, someone came in and, as usual, awkwardly stroked my forehead. They fed me medicine and changed my wet clothes. His fingers gradually grew warmer, carefully avoiding any offense to my skin. The cloth moved back and forth over my body. A few days passed. I finally opened my eyes to see the man, looking much more haggard, but as handsome as ever. Seeing me awake, Lord Valerius was flustered. "Are you uncomfortable anywhere else?" I stared at him. After a long time, a hoarse question came from my throat. "Valerius, from now on, can you treat me like this too?" He was stunned for a moment. Then, his face lit up, like snow melting in the spring sun. A tear even welled in the corner of his eye. "As long as you are willing to forgive me," he said. He had feelings for me, though he didn't know when they had started. From now on, I would be his priority. A person is vulnerable when they are ill. Under his meticulous care, I knew that the part of me that had not forgotten him was clinging to me again, like a persistent ghost. After I recovered, I allowed him into my courtyard. He was overjoyed, a youthful energy that was appropriate for his age showing on his face. For the next 4 years, though he was still a bit formal and overly obsessed with power, we got along very well. He no longer met with Princess Serafina and treated me better and better. In our moments of passion, we even exchanged vows. Knowing I loved to read travelogues, he promised me, in a few years, when I resign from my post, I will travel with you to the northwest and see the world. In the 6th year of our marriage, he finally became the Grand Chancellor. I prepared a small banquet at home to celebrate, ready to finally let down my guard and open my heart to him. But that night, the red candles burned down to nothing, and the sky began to lighten. But he did not return. 3 days later, he rushed home, and I stopped him. I already knew that the Emperor had played matchmaker again. This time, for Princess Serafina, who was a year younger than me. But not in the usual way, by having her build her own palace and marry a prince consort, but by marrying her into the Xia family. To prevent the Xia heir from entering officialdom, he had made her a princess, the family's matriarch. One could only imagine the schemes and malice she would face, marrying into a family as the person who had ruined their heir's future. The Emperor had become so deranged he was willing to disown his own daughter. And my husband, now standing before me with a guilty expression, was telling me he was going to help the princess escape. I asked numbly, "Are you going with her?" He paused for 2 breaths, then said, "Yes." I asked again, "Do you know that in the eyes of others, this is an elopement and also treason?" He lowered his head and said yes. I asked again, "Even if it means I will die too?" He did not answer. I took 2 steps forward and slapped him. "Say it!" He was still silent. Just then, there was a sound from outside. Summoning called him in a hushed voice. "My lord, we're running out of time!" He turned to leave. I grabbed his arm, my voice sharp. "Will you say it or not? If you don't, you are not leaving." The person outside grew more urgent. He became angry and said hastily, "Yes." I got my answer and finally let go. My body drained of all strength. He strode out without hesitation before getting on the carriage. He looked back one last time. I collapsed to the floor, muttering to myself. It was just a gold ingot I lost to her in a bet. That year, Princess Serafina had just been infamed. She had challenged me to a horse race in the countryside, but she had gathered a group of noble youths to tamper with my horse. In the end, I lost, and had to give her the most valuable thing I had, a gold ingot my parents had given me for emergencies. She had looked at it with disdain, calling me tacky, but had stuffed it into her pouch without hesitation. Many years later, during one of our rare peaceful moments, she had casually mentioned that she had been riding recklessly in the street, and had almost trampled a beggar. Seeing the lifeless look in his eyes, and with no one else around, she had gotten scared and thrown the tacky gold at him. What does he know about tacky? His eyes lit up immediately. He didn't even react when I cursed him for getting in my way. She had laughed. And I, who had always despised her attitude, had quickly put the incident out of my mind. It wasn't until Lord Valerius brought it up a few years ago that I remembered. At first, I didn't tell him because I didn't think it was necessary. But later, I kept silent, because I didn't want him to think that the only ray of light in his impoverished past was just the whim of someone who despised him. I thought that when he had chosen Princess Serafina over me in public, he had already repaid his debt. But I was wrong. It wasn't enough. Perhaps from now on, it would never be enough. Me father and mother had always been so careful, yet they were to be ruined by such a man. I quickly scrambled to my feet and shouted after the departing carriage, "Valerius, I am divorcing you." Tears followed. I wiped them away and went back to my room to write the divorce papers, returning to the prince's residence that very night. After confessing everything to my parents, they were furious but told me, "A princess of the royal blood has the right to divorce her husband. But Lord Valerius is a powerful official. By law, it requires the emperor's personal approval. This matter will likely drag on for some time. I no longer cared about such things. I didn't want to have anything to do with him anymore, I said coldly. Then we will separate. The emperor's own daughter had committed such a scandal. I wanted to see what face he had to ask me to forgive Lord Valerius. In any case, what I had given him was a divorce decree. If the official record said it was a separation, what did it matter? Whether his feelings for Princess Seraphina were gratitude or love, it no longer mattered to me. I could not tie my family's fate to a husband who would always have someone more important than me. Amidst my parents' tears, I left the city the next day. Until now, after so many years, he looked haggard, being pushed out by the torch-wielding servants. His figure was so thin his clothes seemed to hang off him. My heart was like a stone. I closed the door. I had met Lord Alaric in the desert. He was on a mission to capture a foreign spy and had burst into the inn where I was staying. The spy had been living in the room next to mine for a long time. My attendants, for my safety, had carefully investigated all the guests. After I recognized Lord Alaric, I immediately began to cooperate with him, pulling him into my room before the spy realized he was being followed. He is carrying a deadly poison. The man was skilled with silver needles. When my attendants first noticed his suspicious behavior, they had watched him closely and had seen him applying a substance to his needles in a secluded place. At the time, they had thought he was just a quack doctor. Now that I knew his true identity, I told Lord Alaric everything I knew about his schedule and where he got his poison. Half a day later, the spy was captured, and his entire network was taken down. Lord Alaric suddenly asked, "When will you return to the capital?" I was a little confused. You know me. The tips of his ears turned red, but he met my gaze directly. Many years ago, I was fortunate enough to be the third-ranked scholar. At the banquet, I had the honor of seeing the princess once. I finally understood. So he was the third-ranked scholar. No wonder he was so handsome. I had no intention of making small talk and wanted him to leave, but his gaze was intense, and he said anxiously, "If you are to choose another husband, my lady, would you consider me?" I looked him up and down and said bluntly, "Lord Alaric, unless you have some hidden ailment, you should have a wife and children by now. And even if not, you must have several concubines at home." His fox-like eyes held a hint of shyness. He replied, "I come from a merchant family. We have enough money. I have practiced martial arts for many years, and my health is good. I have no hidden ailments. It is just that before, I had no one I wished to marry, and I have never considered taking any concubines. That is why I have delayed until now." I gave him a perfunctory reply and sent him away. But a month later, I received the first letter from my father. He said the emperor was now ill and even more suspicious. I had been away for 3 years, and he was once again thinking of marrying me off. I clutched the letter and remembered the man I had sent away. I immediately sent someone ahead to investigate his background. He was indeed of a clean background. The best part was that he had no life-saving debts to repay, and no old flames. As the Dragon Boat Festival approached, I invited him to watch the boat races. He was completely different from Lord Valerius. Not only was he not at all formal, but his talkative nature was a stark contrast to his cool and distant appearance. A minister of justice, eating a rice dumpling, was forced by my smiling gaze to list 8 good things about it. After he finished, I said, as if just remembering, "Oh, I forgot. Lord Alaric is from the south. You must not be used to savory rice dumplings." But he was unconcerned. "I have been in the capital for so long. I am used to the food here." I was even more pleased. Just then, the boat race reached its climax. The crowd grew restless. In the crush, the railing of the restaurant collapsed. The people in front were still pushing forward, and chaos erupted. As the crowd surged, it knocked over a decorative shelf that separated the main hall. I watched it fall towards me, but I was trapped and couldn't move. I instinctively closed my eyes. At the same moment, a somewhat unfamiliar scent of pine enveloped me. I was pulled into someone's arms. He grunted in pain but still managed to say, "Forgive my impertinence." He told me to hold on tight, and with a few leaps, landed us on an adjacent balcony. Without a word of explanation, he flew down, summoned the on-duty officers, and quickly brought the chaos under control. As the noise subsided, a familiar figure came stumbling towards us. I stood on the balcony, perfectly safe, and met the eyes of Lord Valerius in the crowd below. In an instant, his eyes filled with despair. Lord Alaric finished his work and rushed up, not even glancing at the man below, only asking if I was all right. I said softly, "I do not like my husband to have secrets, Alaric." He was silent for a moment, then patted his injured back and said casually, "I don't believe that a life-saving grace can lead to romantic love. You may not believe me, but I am a man who sticks to his principles. The first time I see someone, I know how I will treat them in the future." He even added cheekily, "You believed you had feelings for Lord Valerius after one glance. Why can't you believe me?" I retorted. "That is why I know my feelings for him were not deep." He dropped the act. "Then you are no match for me. I told you, I stick to my principles." But when he saw me sneeze from the cold, my clothes splattered with water from the toppled vase, he silently went downstairs and returned with a wide cloak. I glared at him. As he bit his lip, about to apologize, a small crack appeared in my heart. After so many years of gloom, a ray of sunlight finally broke through. My wedding day was sunny. This time, Princess Seraphina still came to add to my dowry. She had been worn down by time and looked much gentler. From her, I learned the full story of the past. For example, her elopement had been tacitly approved by the emperor. Marrying his daughter into a noble family was a compromise. But out of pride, he also wanted her to bring some shame to the Shia family. From beginning to end, he had put his daughter last. He had calculated everything, except that Princess Seraphina truly had feelings for the young lord of the Shia family. She had decided to flee so as not to ruin his future. Not long after I left the city, I regretted it. I knew I could never escape my father's guards. I told Lord Valerius the truth. He didn't hesitate for a moment and turned back to find you. But by then, you had already returned to the prince's residence. The servants blocked his way, and he couldn't get in. Aurelia, though I have always been jealous of you for having such good parents, and have always been against you. In the end, I truly did not want Lord Valerius to abandon you." I laughed, indifferent. People come together and part because of fate. I don't care if that incident really happened or not. I don't want a husband who is so calculating, who always puts me last. A wicked thought came to me. I added, "Just like how your father married you into the Shia family but gave you a dowry larger than any princess before you." I was satisfied to see her face turn pale, her hand clutching her scalded skin. I continued, "I will never forgive you, and I am always ready to kick you when you are down. Just like in our youth, we were at each other's throats. This time it was she who fled in disarray. My husband, on a tall horse, was waiting outside to welcome me. He was gentle and kind, a cheerful gentleman without a heavy past even. If there were more troubles ahead, I had already been through the worst. What was there to be afraid of? The breeze was gentle. He secretly took my hand under his sleeve as we bowed to the ancestors together. In the crowd, there was a pair of gloomy eyes, but I paid them no mind. Another 3 years passed. I had both a son and a daughter. The emperor's favorite third prince rebelled, and with the support of the noble families, ascended the throne. But he still valued the commoner officials. The old court officials were only demoted or sent away. Except for Lord Alaric. He had been a spy on the inside, and he still said with a straight face, "The emperor was not good to you. I had no loyalty to him." I covered his mouth and told him he was talking about the former emperor, that he was speaking nonsense. But there was a smile on my lips as I let him insert the jade hairpin he had carved himself into my hair. At that time, Princess Seraphina, who had married into the Shia family, left the palace and took her husband with her. But the imperial physicians diagnosed her with a body full of injuries, causing a great stir in the capital. After this, the former emperor passed away in a few days. After his death, the old officials, led by Lord Valerius, were all demoted or sent back to their hometowns. Only Lord Valerius had requested to be sent away. The day before he left, he came to see me, as he had many times before. This time, I saw him. He said he had never loved anyone else, that his feelings for Princess Seraphina had only ever been gratitude. After he realized his feelings for me, he had never wavered. The incident had been so sudden, but he was completely confident that no one would be harmed. He had intended to repay his debt one last time, and then never see Princess Seraphina again. That was why he had gone. I listened patiently, then finished his story. I told him about the bet and the lost gold ingot. His face turned pale, and he looked lost. Rose, at my signal, spoke to drive him away. "This is the last time our princess will see you, my lord. You are not a good person." He wanted to speak but only shed 2 streams of tears. Finally, he turned and fled in disarray. For many years after, the letters from the south were all read by Lord Alaric. He would read them to me in a dramatic tone. Finally, he would mutter, "Where did this old fossil come from? He is making a career out of being the other man. How disgusting." I wouldn't catch what he said and would ask him, but he would just put on his cheerful face and say, "You know, I come from a merchant family. Even after being an official for so long, I still have some vulgar habits. I wouldn't want to pollute your ears." I would be skeptical, but in his ever-gentle gaze, I would close my eyes in peace and drift off to sleep on the small couch.